Hi there. So I wanted to do a short video because some of you are probably starting to examine assignment 5 because I know it's a short course, so you'll be jumping to the next assignment. And some of you may have some anxiety or concerns because you may never have done a critical review. So I wanted to just do a short video to clarify the expectations, talk to you about the etiquettes of this sort of of assignments, and level playing field, so everyone has the same starting point. So what are the desired outcomes of the assignments for me? Well, it's to ensure, and I've said this before, that you have at least an in-depth mastery of at least one course reading. Very short course, probably browsed a lot of readings, but we want you to be able to really get into the nitty-gritty of one reading that you can take away from this course. And the choice is yours. Also, the critical review is a key Masters of Education competency. So it's one of the outcomes that we want you to see master completely before you leave the Masters. So if you've not trained on this before, it's a good opportunity to do so and leave with that competency. Choice of article. Any article in the course that contains data collection and analysis is going to be suitable. Why? Well, because the large majority of journal articles actually contain data collection analysis. The only other piece that you're going to find are book chapters, which are built very differently and often don't produce anything fresh or new, but really more do a sort of recap on the field and the state of literature in the field, or opinion pieces or theory pieces, and those so position pieces or theory pieces, and those would be very, very difficult to critique. There's a couple in the course, so watch out. How do you see whether there's data collection and analysis? There's a methodology section, and the author actually explains to you how they went about doing a study and then collecting the data and analyzing it. You can also suggest a text that touches on critical pedagogy, and you can do so, but I would recommend that you vet it through me and that you contact me by email just to check the suitability of the article before you throw yourself in. Obviously, there's that section where we looked at very significant, with the Lead and the Smith articles and all those. There, often students default back to those, but you could use any of the others as well as long as they contain data analysis. What are the key sections of a journal article? So I'm asking this because really to see what the key sections of the review would be, you need first of all to understand what the key sections of a journal article. And the journal article is pretty much always the same. It's a template. When we write this, we actually write the template before we start writing because there's no creative freedom here. We have to have these sections. So the first one is intro and context and the objective. Now, depending on the authors, you may find 3 sections or 1 section. I tend to have 1 section for all of these. If you have 3 sections, it's still the same. It's pretty much touches on these 3 things. Introduce the research questions, explain the context, and talk about the objectives of the study. The next one is the literature review, which looks at the state of the literature on this topic in the whole field. Then there's usually a section on theory, though sometimes the section on theory is blended into the section on methodology, but really typically there should be a short section on theory before you get to methodology, because theory informs methodology. Then you have a section setting out the methodology and how the data was collected and analyzed. And then you have a section on findings. What did they find? What did they see? And then a section on outcomes. So outcomes about the pertinence of the findings for the field. So keep that in mind, and pretty much the critical review actually follows exactly the same pattern. So when you review it, you can actually follow exactly the same sort of checklist. Intro and context and objective. So you're going to be able to assess the relevance of those objectives and that context to the field. Is the question pertinent? Is the question interesting? Are the objectives pertinent to the field? Are these the sort of questions that we want answers to? Then you're going to have to look at the richness and the accuracy of the literature review. This is sometimes more difficult for graduate students, but basically what we're trying to do here is you assess how exhaustive and up-to-date the literature review has been. Or are there blind spots? Are there things that you should have been discussed that were not discussed in the literature review? Critiquing whether it's up to date, that's going to be fairly easy. You will see that a lot of articles that's not respected, unfortunately. When we mean up to date, we really mean no older than 10 years before the piece is written in terms of the date of references, and ideally no more than 5. Theory, if there is a theory section, you can examine its suitability, but here, obviously, the lens is critical pedagogy. So that's the theoretical framework that's being used in all the articles that we're looking at. So look for it. and then have a short section where you examine the suitability of using critical pedagogy as a lens in this study. Then the methodology, how effective is it? Now, I know it's hard for graduate students, but I'm sure you're going to be able to do fairly common sense analysis of whether you might have done this a different way, whether there was a different possibility to collect data and to analyze it, and whether there's anything that troubles you in the findings, the analysis itself. Findings, then you're going to assess the findings. Did the authors deliver on their objectives? So you go back to the very beginning. They had an intention, they had a set out with certain objectives. And in the findings, you're going to assess whether these objectives were met. Sometimes they are, sometimes they're not. So there's something worth critiquing here. And then finally, you get to the outcomes. In the outcomes, the author is coming back to the field and the literature review and stating the pertinence of what they found in relation to the field and to future researchers and future authors or future readers. So you're going to be able to assess that. Has the piece made a contribution to the field, an original contribution? Now, because this critical review is done within the parameters of this course, we do want a section on critical pedagogy. So you may be able to discuss it in the theory section, but if you don't think you've been exhaustive enough, I would want a last section. In this case, it's not normally there in a normal critique, but because this is a critique within a specific course on a specific topic, I'd want a section examining to what extent critical pedagogy has been useful as a lens in this study or in this paper. So very straightforward. Later on, if you get very comfortable with the exercise, people will, for the elegance and flow of the piece, they may actually touch on the sections in different orders as long as everything is there. But at this stage, if it's your first go, you're not confident, it's nothing wrong with sticking to the actual same skeleton as the piece itself and then critiquing each element in turn. Some etiquette around the critical review. If you've not practiced this before, you don't use the first person. It's a bit, it's fictitious, definitely. It's a bit absurd because it is very much your own consciousness and your own sort of reflection, which is centered in the middle of the critique, but we still, as a matter of style, we don't use the first person in critiques. No personal opinion. Again, prima facie, so on the face of it, you're not expressing opinion, but you are often the center positioning that examines and critiques the piece. So you are there, but you are going to have to be careful to just play with the language so it looks like you're saying, the author may surprise the reader by not spending enough time looking at the repercussions or the impact of the findings for the field. So you've said what you thought, but you haven't said, I feel that. You're just doing it in a sort of circumvented way. Be gentle as well. In academia, we tend to not be harsh. Even if you want to be harsh about a certain angle, you tend to not be harsh in the language. So you are going to really sugarcoat it. And again, find ways to say, for example, the reader might be surprised not to see a section addressing blah, blah, blah. Okay, that means, I think there's a section missing, but you're not being blunt. You're actually, being sort of creative with the language so that you don't, you still say what you have to say, but you're not shocking the other author. It's a convention in academia because the people that you are critiquing, you may, if you we rarely in academia, in fact, in professional, critique journal articles, but we critique, we do in the double-blind review process before they get published. And it's the same tone we adopt there. So we, even if something is going to be rejected, we say it in a nice way when we're talking about what's missing. But what you're going to see in the style that gets published is often a review of a book chapter or of a book. And that we do frequently as academics, and we adopt this same format. And even if something is really wrong with the book chapter or the book, we are going to sugarcoat it because the essence of the positioning is that this is someone who's a peer, this is someone you may end up presenting with at a conference, someone you may meet in other environments once you're an academic. And you don't want to put yourself, you want to remain diplomatic. You don't want to be so harsh in the way you phrase things that person is starting to hate you. And if they meet you, they're going to have some resentment. So it's a normal etiquette that we are fairly soft in the wording. So we point out the failings, but we are soft in the wording. So that can be done at the end. If you write a piece, and you can reread it after a couple of days and see that you're not being too harsh. And if you are, play with the language so that it flows without being hurtful. No or very few references. The point in a critical review is not, it's again, it's a bit contradictory because we say no first person and no personal opinion, but really it is your read on the article. So we're not that interested in having other references to other work. You can have the odd reference if it's essential. Like if you're talking about something, for example, which is missing in the piece that you've seen elsewhere and that should be mentioned there, then you might use a reference just to show that you have a standing to make that comment, that you've seen that theme or that issue discussed elsewhere, but you don't see it discussed in. So you might have a reference to show something like that. And the normal way to format this is to put an APA citation of the article at the top. That way you can go, you cut to the chase, and you don't have to play around with saying I am going to review an article, because first of all you don't use I, plus you don't really want to waste word count by saying this is a review of the article. No, it's clear the article is cited at the top. You can go straight into it. You don't have to introduce the authors. You don't have to use their name. So you don't have to use in-text citation about the article because you've cited it at the top. And then you just go in saying the author or the authors in this article do this, etc., etc. I forgot to say that in the intro and context, yeah, you do have to summarize in a couple of lines what the article is set to do. So before you say, the pertinence of this objective to the field exists or doesn't exist, or this is something that was worth looking at the very top, when you assess intro, context, and objectives, do summarize the piece, but you don't spend 200 words summarizing. You summarize it maybe 40 words or 50 words. Very, very, very short, sort of concise summary of what the piece is at the top, and then you begin. So no in-text citation. You don't have to cite the name of the author. It's clear that the author is there because you've cited it at the top. The other thing I was going to say is that level of language. A critique is fairly academic, so you have to maybe play with your level of language so it remains fairly formal and academic. No jargon, etc. But it must feel like an academic piece. It's not a blog, or it's not an op-ed, etc. It's a piece that can be published, and it counts as a publication if you ever publish a book review, for example. The other thing is that be careful when you're summarizing your piece at the top. Sometimes authors are using jargon or terminology or acronyms, etc. Don't jump in and use the acronyms. The reader has to be able to understand what the piece is about without going to the piece. Okay, you are telling them whether it's worth reading or not reading. So if the reader has to go and read the piece to understand what you're talking about, then it's pointless. So it's got to be in layperson language with no acronyms, no technical words, etc. Or if it's essential that you use a technical word, you're going to have to explain it quickly, because it's a window into the article. So you can't assume that the reader already has the terminology and some of the concepts and some of the acronyms that are being used in the piece. So be careful. It's okay for an author to use acronyms in a piece for 5,000 words because they don't want to repeat a certain term, but it's not going to be clear to the reader that reads your critique. So make sure you don't do that. There you go. It's very straightforward. It's very structured. It's very short, so you're not going to have much space to play around with. If you have any questions, let me know. You can use a tutorial or you can email me, etc. But I'm going to post this now just to make you all relax about what the expectations are.